All right, everyone say hi to the camera so they can see you. I don't want to move the camera around.
Hi to
You
the
get-
camera.
Hi, can they
Hi
see
to
me?
the camera.
Everyone has to get it.
Okay,
Everyone
drop
on
it
the
off.
Up in front of me.
It was flop this time.
Hi.
Better.
All right, okay. There's my audience. Gathered you all here for this quick 5-minute speech because you're a bunch of nerds like me interested in interesting stories, I guess. I don't know, about my childhood. Some of you were here for my childhood. Some of you had childhoods. Anyways, okay. Are you ready? Okay.
Yes.
All right. This was a short speech I gave a few weeks ago about how the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had started off as a very popular comic book for older teenagers and became this worldwide billion-dollar phenomenon for small children. But I have a larger story to tell than what I could contain in that 5-minute speech. You see, it starts with the history of anthropomorphic animal characters. Now, anthropomorphism is the attribution of human traits to non-human entities. We have characters like this going back to cave paintings, ancient Egyptian mythology. You have literature like Alice in Wonderland had the White Rabbit. In film, you have characters like Mickey Mouse. You have sports mascots. It permeates the history of our culture. Now, in the world of comic books, you had lots of funny animal characters, from your Disney characters through Warner Brother characters like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck. You had, anything, Pink Panther, you name it. But things changed in December of 1973 with the debut of Howard the Duck from writer Steve Gerber. Now, this was a cigar-chomping, foul-mouthed, funny animal character that was kind of written for an older audience than those classic Disney-style type of characters that we had been used to. And immediately upon his debut, George Lucas wanted to make a film about the character to get to work on it right after the release of American Graffiti in 1973. But it took all the way until 1986 before that film came out from Lucasfilm. And when it did, it was the first movie based on a Marvel comic book character to come out since Captain America's movie serials from 1944. Now, when Steve Gerber learned that Marvel was trying to make a movie based on Howard the Duck, he sued them, thinking that he owned the rights to the character. And in 1981, he created this comic, Destroyer Duck, to help raise funds for his legal case, which he lost. But this issue gave us the debut of the character GRU the Wanderer from Sergio Aragonés. Now, that is the artist that he drew the little cartoon janitor at the end credits of the Carol Burnett show. He would draw all the little doodles in the margins of Mad Magazine. And GRU the Wanderer became very popular. He spun off into his own comic book in 1982 and is still going to this day. GRU is a parody of Conan the Barbarian. But the guy that wrote the lettering in the comic book is a man named Stan Sakai, who would become famous in his own right for creating his character, Usagi Yojimbo. Now, more on that in a second, because I've got another parody of Conan to get to with Cerebus the Aardvark from December of 1977. Now, this is written, drawn, and self-published by a man named Dave Sim, who did all 300 issues, beginning to end. He had it planned out that way, and this is the longest-running, most successful comic book from an independent publisher. And I first saw these Cerebus comic books at my friend Sean's house in 1988. Following right on the heels of Cerebus was a man named Steve Galacki, who started creating and publishing his own anthropomorphic characters back in 1979. And this led to him putting out his own anthology series, Albedo, in January of 1983. Now, this is the comic that began this entire trend of independent publishers putting out these black and white comic books about anthropomorphic characters written for an adult audience. And this first issue introduced the characters Nilsson Ground Thumper and Hermie, which are the first creations by Stan Sakai, the letterer of GRU Comics, before he created Usagi Yojimbo. Now, around this time in 1983, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird started drawing a comic book about a character they called Fugitoid. And in November of that year, Kevin drew this picture of a Ninja Turtle. Peter added the adjectives Teenage Mutant to it and drew his own version, and together they crafted an origin story tied into the origin of Marvel Comics' Daredevil character and made it a parody of the grim and gritty take done by Frank Miller of Daredevil Comics at that time. In 1984, they hand-assembled a comic book called Gobbledygook that they made on a Xerox copier about their character Fugitoid. And on the back cover, they advertised their upcoming comic, The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which they were able to self-publish in May of that year. On a side note, that same month, the writer of every issue of G.I. Joe Comics, Larry Hama, introduced his character, Bucky O'Hare, this space adventuring green rabbit anthropomorphic character who very much resembles the green rabbit spacefaring anthropomorphic character Jackson from Star Wars comics from 1977. It took another 5 months for Eastman and Laird to put out their second issue of TMNT, and the following month Albedo Anthropomorphics put out their second issue, which introduced Stan Sakai's character Usagi Yojimbo, this anthropomorphic samurai rabbit character who became very successful and would cross over with the Ninja Turtles from time to time. A year later, in September of 1985, TMNT had become so popular with teenagers by word of mouth at the comic book store that when the fourth issue came out, the first issue was on its fourth printing, the second issue was on its second printing, and a role-playing game was released, which was the very first licensed property for the Turtles. It was about this time that my little group found out about the Turtles through our friend Alex, who had been buying the issues up. I think he had a second printing of issue 1, and he's the one that bought the role-playing game. And he took us through an adventure one night at my friend Mike's house. Now, that's where Mike and I created my character, Steel Grip Clucky, that I talked about in the Kevin on Doodling episode. And boy, on that adventure, we stole a police car, went on a high-speed chase, and were all promptly killed by shotgun blasts. And the money made from that licensing deal allowed them to put out issue 5 with its very first full-color cover, and the first 4 issues were reprinted by another company with full-color interiors. But in 1986, everyone jumped on the bandwagon by creating copycat comic books, starting right there in January with the adolescent radioactive black belt Hamsters. Now, my friend Mike had this comic at the time. That's when I first saw it. In fact, this is the only one of the comics I'm going to cover that my brother had actually heard of, other than the Ninja Turtles, before I made that speech a few weeks ago. And this was actually pretty successful at the time. Issue 8 was drawn by Sam Keith, who would later go on to much fame with his comic book and cartoon series, The Max. I was a big fan of Sam Keith's. I first noticed him on Lobo from DC Comics, and then on to Wolverine from Marvel Comics Presents, and I tried to go back and find all of his early rare work from independent publishers, and I found that he made his debut in 1982 in the first issue of Spaced from Tom Stazer. Now, Tom pops up a few times in this story, so I tried to get every issue of Spaced, and wasn't too hard to get the entire run, except for issue 1. I owned these for years before this ever popped up on eBay, and when it did, it was part of a whole set of all the ones I already owned. It was priced at $100. I messaged the guy, can I just buy issue 1 from you? And he said, I don't want to break up the set, that's issue 1 is the one of value. I'll never be able to sell the others. So I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to complete this set. But I saw, it said $100, but it said, or make a best offer. So I offered him $50, thinking, well, I'll just sell the duplicates someday. And he counter-offered me $25. He went down. Okay, whatever. So I said, sure, here's $25. And I got the whole thing. So I got issue 1. I got duplicates of all the rest. But you know what? I just checked eBay yesterday, and there is a whole new set, including issue 1, this complete set up there for $250. So there you go. But a decade after this, he came back with a new series called Plastron Cafe, which I got all the issues from. And this features new spaced stories, and it also features some Ninja Turtle stories, because this is put out by Mirage Studios, which is the company created by Eastman and Laird to publish the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, TMNT. Now, it took almost halfway through 1986 for the rest of these copycat comics to start flooding out, starting in May with the only other one that my friend Mike had at the time, The Fish Police. Here's number 1. This actually ran for 6 years and got its own cartoon series. And it was followed in June by Hamster Vice, Samurai Penguin, Critters, the adult thermonuclear samurai elephants, and Laughing Gas. The Samurai Penguin was the first one that I found on my own when scouring the back issue boxes at my local comic store in the early 1990s, and I was able to find all 8 issues of its 6-issue limited run. I know, weird. And Critters was another anthology book by Steve Galacki from Albedo Anthropomorphics fame, which featured new stories about his rabbit character, new stories by Stan Sakai of Nilson Ground Thumper and Hermie, as well as Usagi Yojimbo, new stories by Tom Stazer from Spaced, as well as rare stuff from Sam Keith. Now, the adult thermonuclear samurai elephants was just an advertisement on the back of Marvel Age number 40, because it took them 3 years to finally put the comic out in 1989, and by then they renamed it Power Pachyderms. And Laughing Gas was a parody comic. The first issue featured the first knockoff team, the adolescent radioactive black belt Hamsters, and introduced the second knockoff team, the preteen Dirty Jean Kung Fu Kangaroos, which spun off into its own comic series 2 months later. Now, the rest of the issues of Laughing Gas featured a parody of Boris the Bear, who I will get to in just a second, because July brought us the mildly microwaved prepubescent Kung Fu Gophers, the post-atomic cyborg gerbils, and Boris the Bear. Now, when I met my friend Sean in 1988, I saw this comic in his closet. A teddy bear dressed as Rambo with a sword like Snake Eyes? That's cool. And he slaughters the teenage radioactive black belt mutant ninja critters? I gotta read this, so cool. Sean snatched it from my hand. No, not allowed to read that. Not allowed to touch that. No Boris the Bear for you, Kevin. Why? No answer. No Boris the Bear. Well, till now, I got my own copy. Yeah, I got 2 copies. I've got every single Boris the Bear comic in the world! What are you gonna do about that, Sean? You know what? I got a hardcover book from 1895 called Boris the Bear Hunter. Now, in August, we got the cold-blooded Chameleon Commandos, the geriatric gangrene jiu-jitsu gerbils. Check out this back cover. I got all the issues. The aristocratic extraterrestrial time-traveling thieves, and Barabbas. In September, we got Samurai Squirrel. In October, we got the naive interdimensional commando koalas. And at the end of the year, we got the Bushido Blade of Zatoichi Walrus. But that was it. Just that big boom in 1986. In January of 1987, we got the next series from Steve Galacki, from Albedo and Critters, called Fusion. It's another sci-fi series, not a Ninja Turtle knockoff, but I got every issue. And lastly, just a couple of stragglers. The sultry teenage super foxes, not animals, but the takeoff of that crazy style of name, and gorilla groundhog. It was at that time that licensing agent Mark Friedman sought out the Ninja Turtle brand, and he changed it for a new demographic. He watered it down for small children. Eastman and Laird handed over the writing and drawing of the comic to new creators. Playmates released a toy line, and a Saturday morning cartoon debuted. Now, this gave the Turtles new appearances, new personalities. They started to talk like surfers, cowabunga dude. They started eating pizza. But it became a billion-dollar phenomenon. But it left its teenage audience behind because now it was for little kids. After that, there were a few more parody comics in 1988. Komodo and the Defiance, and the adventure of the Karate Pig, Ninja Flounder, and the 4D Monkey. There were even parodies of the new cartoon, like the immature radioactive samurai slugs from a 1990 episode of Tiny Toon Adventures, and a new cartoon called Samurai Pizza Cats in 1991. And Mirage Studios, the publisher of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, put out their own parody in 1990 called the Green Gray Sponge Suit Sushi Turtles. And finally, in December of 2018, through a Kickstarter campaign, Kevin Eastman, the creator of that very first Ninja Turtle drawing, put out a trade paperback called Drawing Blood about a comic book artist drawing his own parody called The Radically Rearranged Ronin Ragdolls. So I like the original Ninja Turtles, that comic book, the copycat comics, that little window of time that I was there for before things changed, made it for little kids, made it a big success for the whole world to enjoy. You know, they do make these new live-action movies. There's 6 of them so far, and I like those. But I also like the stories told in this documentary, Turtle Power, the definitive history of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird talking about when they were just a couple of young guys having fun, trying to make each other laugh, making little funny drawings, creating their own comic book and seeing what they could do with it. It reminds me of myself at that age and my creative friends like Sean and Mike. Fun times. But time marches on. And so ends the tale of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle copycat comics.
Yay! There we go. Go Ninja, go Ninja.
Here's it.
Go Ninja,
All right, everyone come and say hi to the camera again.
Very good, very good. Very
We're
good.
the world's most
Bye.
fighting team.
Bye.
And that was it. Yes. Well, what are you going to do about that, Sean?